this border war. Fans called it Moonshine Throwdown. I think that's the best rivalry name, an unofficial name, but the best rivalry name I've come across.
Yeah, unofficial that should become official soon enough.
Embrace it.
5 receivers at Duncan's disposal. Duncan stepping up. Hit! Ball is loose!
Big call here.
Marshall thinks they have it, and the Herd do!
Here's the kickoff from Amaretto Curry to the Hilltoppers, and we are underway, and a fake reverse on the kick return. And here comes Townsend down the left sideline. What a way to start it for Western Kentucky on the road, and it is an opening touchdown return, and just like that, the Hilltoppers strike first.
Justin Rohrwasser to try to win it for Marshall from 53 yards out. It's got the leg. It is good! And the perfect season continues for Justin Rohrwasser.
Goes for 2. Going for the win. Western Kentucky going for the victory. Rolling to his right, quick strike, and they did it! Western Kentucky has ended the perfect season into the hands of Willie McNeil. A shocker here in West Virginia, and it is over for Marshall. They end the regular season 11-1.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Marshall fans, it's your turn now for position group breakdowns, and Trace is with me tonight, and we're talking about, yes, the potentially single most important position for the Herd this year, as just about any team in the country, and that's quarterbacks. We're going to do, Trace chose to start out of the gate just like Steven did. We're talking quarterbacks and coaching staffs this week. One of the most, if not the most important position on the field, maybe not for Marshall as a whole, since they do have a couple of productive quarterbacks back on the roster, which we'll talk about in a minute. So one could argue that potentially offensive line is the most important position to talk about for Marshall this season. Still others might think that it's running back with the departure of Brendan Knox, but we'll get to all of that. But for tonight's purposes, Trace, it's quarterbacks. And just about anybody who pays any kind of attention to football will pretty much tell you quarterback is the single most important position on the field. At any given time. I mean, it just kind of is. So let's, we've got our rankings from Phil Steele. We've got our own personal feelings locked and loaded. We've got some good information pulled from Herd Zone as far as the roster is concerned. So I'm rip-roaring and ready to go. You ready to get this thing started?
Ready to roll.
He's ready. It's been a long offseason. We finally get to talk about the 2021 season, and boy, it's closing in fast. So look, Phil Steele, I don't really know what's up with this, Trace. Marshall returns. I hate to give a little spoiler of one of the stats early, but if you don't know by now, you're just not paying attention. Marshall returns first-team all-conference quarterback Grant Wells, and the Herd is ranked tied for 5th as a quarterback unit from Phil Steele with Louisiana Tech, UTSA, UTEP, Rice, and Charlotte. So take that for what it's worth. I'm not sure that I can fully agree with that, because if you're returning first team all conference quarterback, I don't understand how you're also tied with, 4 or 5 other teams, I guess, but there are only 2 on the roster according to Herd Zone. And remember, this is a quarterback unit ranking. So other guys have more depth. They got more potential to recover or bounce back if there's some injuries that you got to get into. And Marshall's right now only got 2 guys on the roster. So maybe that's what's feeding into this.
Yeah.
But like we said, Grant Wells, first team all conference in 2020, had a really stellar year for the first 2/3 of the season. And then the wheels kind of came off. We'll talk about the differences in his Jekyll and Hyde season in 2020, his first one as a starter. Phil Steele, I don't know what's up, man. Again, he's ranking Grant Wells 4th team quarterback preseason all conference. Behind, well, we mentioned this when Steven and I were talking. Quarterback first team is Bailey Zappi, the newcomer to Western Kentucky, coming over from Houston Baptist, 10,000 career yard passer. So, there is something to perk up on and pay attention to. The man can throw the ball, and he was brought to BGKY for a reason, and that's specifically to throw the ball. But still, 4th team for Grant Wells. He's a reigning first team all-conference player. Second team, by the way, from Phil Steele is Frank Harris of UTSA. And then Bailey Hockman from Middle Tennessee. No offense, never heard of you. I just haven't. We all thought Asher O'Hara was a great quarterback for Middle Tennessee, and then he hit the portal. So they bring in Bailey Hockman, and evidently Phil likes what Hockman's bringing to the table over Wells too. So good. A little bit of snubbage, a little bit of motivation. Not that Grant Wells needs it, but still, that's kind of on the. I mean, to put it lightly, it's a little bit on the surprising factor. So before we talk about any of that stuff, what do you think, Trace? What about these preseason rankings? The guy Phil Steele, we love what he does, and he's super really accurate in what he does. But I don't know that I can get behind this ranking. I don't know that I can get behind the unit ranking or the individual ranking for Grant Wells. What do you think?
No, I mean, Phil Steele was the best in the business, but he really crapped the bed with this one, in my opinion. I mean, I'm not even saying Grant Wells is like definitively the best quarterback in the conference, but how are you going to put him fourth team behind two or three guys that haven't even played for their team yet? I mean, you know what it makes no sense to me. I mean, if you want to put him second team behind Western Kentucky's guy, sure, but Western Kentucky's guys never play at this level. We don't know how it's going to turn out. I mean, we have expectations, everybody does, but it doesn't mean that he's going to go out and throw for 5,000 yards. So I mean, Grant Wells, out of all the quarterbacks in Conference USA last year, he definitely had the best, statistical season. Now, could it have been a whole lot better? Oh, yeah, could have been a whole lot better. But even in those last three games, he had the 5 interception, just horror show against Rice. But after that, even though he still was not himself, he still wasn't throwing interceptions after that. He only had 4 interceptions in the first 7 games. Then had 5 in the and didn't have another interception after that. So, I mean, he wasn't lighting the world on fire by no means, but he wasn't throwing interceptions besides in that one game. So, I mean, I think that at work you have to put him second team all conference and probably first team, honestly, just because he's the only returning guy with any kind of clout at all at this point. So I think Phil still mark on that one.
So I'm looking at it while you're talking there, and Hockman from Middle Tennessee comes over from NC State, where he played quite a few games. So you're getting a little bit of Power 5 bias, honestly.
Right.
That what else could it be? I mean, he's
Right.
never taken a meaningful snap in Murfreesboro. Bailey Zappi, for all the yards he's passed for, has never taken a meaningful snap in BGKY yet. Frank Harris is a lot of potential to break out, right, for UTSA, who's going to be pretty good this year coming out of the West, but honestly, of those 4 guys in Conference USA, the only truly known entity for their team is Grant Wells.
Yeah.
And so that's a little bit of a disrespectful pick. 2 transfers and a guy that could break out. I mean, Harris could break out in a big way, but you're still talking about 2 transfers and a potential breakout player over a guy that was first team all conference last year. First team all conference last year, but I digress. So let's move along. Let's talk about Grant Wells, redshirt freshman, first year as a starter last year. So you got to think he's QB1 coming out of the gate. Unquestionable. Got to be. Nothing against Luke Zaban. Luke Zaban played great in limited action, really provided a spark to the herd, gave him a different dynamic at times, as a very effective runner when he has to be, and he can throw the ball too. So, but it's Grant Wells' team. Until something happens drastically, this is Grant Wells' team, and it should be. The 6'2", 210-pounder, of course, local kid from Charleston, 50 minutes away from the Joan. Doesn't get any better than that. The best stat that we're probably going to talk about, at least in this podcast and maybe throughout all the herd position group breakdowns, is that both quarterbacks currently on the roster for Marshall are West Virginia kids. One's from Charleston, one's from Huntington. You talked about the year for Grant Wells. We've talked about it already a ton, about it was a first team all conference season, 165 out of 270, 2,091 yards, 18 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. And you're like, wow, 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. That's not that great, but you said it, through 5 in one game. So more than half of those interceptions came when the wheels came off against Rice at home on senior day, which was unfortunate. 54 attempts rushing the ball for a positive 174 and another 2 touchdowns on the ground. So Grant Wells can move the ball with his legs as well. He can pick up that 3rd and short if he has to. They're great in a little bootleg run. It worked to perfection against Appalachian State. He trotted in from 20 yards out, not a player in sight. The first 7 games of his almost 2,100 yards, nearly 1,700 of those came in those first 7 games. And 16 of his 18 touchdowns came in those first 7 games, and only 4 of the 9 interceptions came in those first 7 games. But the final 3 games, the really the 3 that mattered probably the most, which was Senior Day against Rice, terrible game. 5 interceptions, terrible. Nothing went right. Conference USA Championship game at home, terrible performance. Didn't even complete a pass in the first half. I think that was that game, or was that the bowl game?
It was, UAB.
Yeah, it was a Conference USA title game.
Yeah.
I mean, terrible, abysmal performance. And then you go to the bowl game, and of course, you can toss a lot out of the window when you talk about a bowl game, but particularly for Marshall, even though all they really do is win bowl games, and this one they didn't, and they're on a 2-game schneid now. They didn't have Brendan Knox. They didn't have Josh Ball. So they probably weren't, it's not probably, they weren't at full strength offensively to do what they normally like to do. So, not a whole lot of that falls on Grant Wells, but he still played in the game, still didn't play tremendously. Herd didn't as a team, really. But in the final 3 biggest games of the season, 5 interceptions, 2 touchdowns, and 417 yards. It's not going to win you any ball games. Nope. It's just not. And it didn't. Herd went 0-3 in that stretch. So what can you say? What do you expect from Grant Wells now? You talked about a first-year head coach. You talked about the only holdover, which we'll talk about from the staff, is Tim Cramsey, the offensive coordinator, who's also double dutying with the quarterbacks again. So you got a little bit of familiarity there. And we can talk about some other things that the Herd did, but without getting into the coaching staff too deep. They bring back Bill Legg, who was the architect of one of the most prolific offenses that Marshall had. Let's face it. He may have, lots of people think he may or may not have been the scapegoat for Doc Holliday to get another year or two when it started turning a little bit sour. They got rid of Legg and Doc stuck it out. And you people have their own opinions on that. But the fact of the matter is the guy's been an OC before. He has orchestrated a lot of points being scored for Marshall. He's back on staff. And you've got some young offensive coaches like Clint Trickett coaching wide receivers, who was co-OC at FAU last year. So there's a lot of offensive minds there that can help exploit the talents of Grant Wells. So what do you think about Grant Wells coming off of 2020, looking forward to 2021? What are you expecting from him this year?
Well, I would expect another good year. I would expect a year where he's more consistent from top to bottom. I mean, to me personally, I don't think, of course this comes with the territory, but I don't think he needs, most of the things he needs to improve on aren't his skill set, because, we saw skill set's pretty daggone impressive. The guy can make every throw on the field. He can run the ball when he has to. He's accurate. All that's all pluses, but you just can't go out like he went out last year in the last 3 games. It was just rough. And it's not remotely all on him. We don't know what was going on in that locker room and what was going on with all the rumors and drama about Doc's status and everything. You know how, there's a crap ton more going on there that we don't know about it. So it's not all on Grant Wells. But, look, at the end of the day, he was a freshman. Freshmen are going to have freshman games. He didn't have a freshman game for 70% of the season until the last, 3. So, he went a long time. He went a lot longer without having a freshman game than most Marshall freshmen have had in the past. So, You got to look at it like that. I expect him to have a really good year. If he can and I know that consistency and finishing strong is going to be the 2 most important factors for him this year. And not just him, but the entire team in general. But especially for Grant Wells, it's the quarterback, most important position on the field, especially offensively. So that's what I expect. I expect more consistency, and just an overall better year. A year that he'll finish with not such a bad taste in his mouth.
And some things we have to take into account is, of course, which we'll get into when we get into other position groups, is there are a lot of weapons gone for Grant Wells that were there a year ago. Brock Thompson gone. Artie Henry's gone. So you're going to need guys that we've said before, guys like Corey Gamage, huge weapon. He's going to have to be that guy now. It's got to click for him. For Grant Wells to have a big year, you're going to need that outside threat that goes 6'3", 6'4", ish You've got Xavier Gaines. You know what he can do, but he can only do so much. You know, there are other guys in the receiving core that are just gonna have to step up. There's no other way to do it. So Willie Johnson's been there, going to provide tons of leadership. You know Willie can catch the ball. You know when Willie gets open, ain't nobody catching Willie. So you need these young guys to take a step up. And you know, quarterback can only pass for as many yards as the guy on the other end catches, right?
Yeah.
So if nobody's catching it, you're not tallying any yards. But I'm with you. I think this is less about the physical and more about the mental. And Wells obviously has to have a sour taste in his mouth. And it's probably been his personal mantra all offseason is to finish. You said it. You nailed it. I got to finish strong. Finish. He can't be happy with the way 2020 closed out. Can't be. And to go out and dazzle and be a darling for the first 7 career starts. I mean, did Marshall not think they captured lightning in a bottle and were like, man, we thought he was good, but we didn't think he was going to be this good.
Yeah.
And every week on the podcast, we were banging the same drum. When's it going to happen? It's got to happen. Sooner or later, it's going to happen. And boy, when it happened against Rice, whoo, it was like the extreme, 2 extremes. You were doing super great and throwing for yardage and moving the ball and touchdowns and few interceptions to, wow, 5 interceptions against Rice at home when you controlled your destiny. I mean, it was all the scenarios lined up and just like collapsed. So I think you're right. The message that he's probably been sending to himself all off season has been finish. And you're right. He can make all the throws. He can do all that. Physically, he can do everything you need him to do. He's proven that he's intelligent enough to run Tim Cramsey's offense. He's efficient at it, and he's just going to need everybody else to step up while he steps his own game up. He's got to develop. Remember, we always go back when we talk quarterbacks. Remember that jump for the great Rakeem Cato from first-year starter to second-year starter, because I can't say from freshman to sophomore year because Wells is still a freshman. Yeah. You know, but from first-year starter to second-year starter, Cato had this monumental, like, leap in productivity. Mm-hmm. And if you can capture, if Grant Wells can capture anything close to that, the Herd's in for a special year. Yep. So we'll see if that happens. Also on the roster, the returning QB2, redshirt sophomore Luke Zaban, 6'2", 202-pounder from Huntington High School in Huntington, West Virginia. Really local kid of the, I love saying this, Luke Zaban of the Huntington Zabans. There's only been a blue million of them that have gone to Marshall and starred at various sports. So a sprinkling of experience, let's say, for young Zaban. 4 games last season. He went 6 of 8 passing, 38 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions, 9 rushing attempts for 76 yards. Kicker is against EKU, all 6 of those completions and all the yardage came in that game. He went 6 for 6 in that game and then 0 for 2 in the other game he tried to attempt a pass in. But still, when he got in the game, I think the offense, cause he was getting in the game with the 2s and 3s at their respective positions. You know, our RB3, guys down the wide receiver depth chart, yada, 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 and they still moved the ball. He did well. So I don't think that too many people would be petrified if Luke Zaban had to take first-team reps. No. You know, I'm not saying that there's going to be a quarterback controversy or anything, but I think people would be okay if Grant Wells got dinged up and got knocked out of a game in the first half and Luke Zaban had to take over in the second half of the game. I think people would be okay with that. I don't think they would be pushing the panic button. Luke Zaban, Trace, what do you think about having a quality QB2 coming back?
It's definitely a very important factor. I mean, when how many teams over the years, not just college, you know, any level of football, how many teams have lost their starting quarterback and then just completely fell off the rails because they didn't have anybody else behind them? Yep. I mean, you know, that's an issue. That's always an issue every single year for every team. You always are thinking, okay, we have to build quarterback depth, at least have one guy we can count on behind the QB1. And I think Luke Zaban is that. I mean, you know, ran the ball really effectively, especially in that EKU game. I mean, I think he got it and threw the ball a whole lot last year. But when he did throw the ball, he made a couple really nice throws, like one right down pretty deep go route, I think, on the edge of the sideline there. I mean, right, didn't throw him out of bounds. I don't remember who it went to, but I remember the throw. I'm thinking, okay, that was a nice throw. And then he's kind of like he runs kind of kind of powerful, can run downhill, pretty good speed for his size and stuff. So I mean, I think he's a solid number 2 guy. And there should be a little bit of comfort level knowing that he's behind Grant Wells. I mean, everybody would. I mean, unless you're crazy, wants to see Grant Wells at quarterback 1. But I mean, Luke Saban could definitely come in and make an impact if his number's called, this isn't to disregard him, but hopefully his number isn't called. Let's just put it that way. But
well, it also wouldn't surprise me to see the Herd come up with a small little package of plays just for him.
Yeah,
to kind of keep Grant Wells healthy in like goal line situations or certain things like that, to where Wells doesn't need to take a hit on this play. We know that Saban can make this play just as well as Wells can, so let's use him. That type of thing. But yeah, I remember several good throws. A dart touchdown pass to like third string tight end Amir Richardson last year was a nice little play late in the game. And we're talking about him playing. I mentioned it before with guys like RB3 and tight end 3 and wide receiver 4, 5, and 6 and still making plays.
Yeah.
The offense really looked good. They moved the ball because it would be Saban there and Knowledge McDaniel in the backfield, and these young guys that were just getting game reps, and it's gonna pay dividends this year. It will pay dividends. Some of these guys that got a spattering of reps last year, but still moved the ball, they still had good chemistry together. That's gonna pay dividends this year. It will. 3 other quarterbacks have been recruited in the 2022 class. I went back and looked at the 2021 class, and there was one quarterback that was recruited. He is still showing as committed, not signed, and he does not appear on the roster. These are the only 2 guys that appear on the Herd Zone roster, Grant Wells and Luke Saban. So right now, Marshall has 2 quarterbacks on the roster. 2. Western Kentucky had 6. I mean, this is a completely different like approach right now. That I don't know if that means there's maybe they're looking for another one in the portal, or if your emergency quarterback, we have to mention it. To me, if they both go down and the apocalypse happens, your third string quarterback's got to be Xavier Gaines, because he played quarterback in high school. He was highly touted, heavily recruited, and he's passed the ball a little bit in a Herd uniform too. I would be almost certain that it would be more of a run heavy type offense if he started to, have to play quarterback, but you got to think he's your emergency QB3 if you need one. Like I said, 3 quarterbacks currently committed in the 2022 class. Let's go ahead and talk about those guys, even though they're not really on campus, on the roster, but we're seeing, just like with a lot of other schools, especially here at Marshall, the way the quarterback position is now being recruited and handled with transfer rules, portal rules, and all that kind of stuff. It's just never going to be the same again. It's never going to be the same again. The high school approach, drafting 1 kid every year in every class or 2 kids in every class, I'm not sure that's going to be the way to go. I mean, you might take 2 or 3 kids, you might take 1, you might take none, because there's probably always going to be somebody that fits your system in the portal that's available, that's coming from somewhere else, that you can plug in and get some yardage out of. But real quick, the 3 guys that are currently committed in the 2022 class: Chase Harrison, 6'2", 205-pounder from Centerville, Ohio. Remember when this guy committed, at least in the Twitterverse, a lot of people were like kind of sort of stunned, because I'm assuming he's a bit of a gamer. They thought this was like a good get for the Herd. And you got to love that. Admittedly, I don't know much about these high school kids, but I can talk a little bit more about the latter 2 than Mr. Harrison here, but we'll see how that goes. The second quarterback we're going to talk about, one really familiar name to a lot of Herd fans and anybody that's ever paid attention to a Marshall game at all. I can't imagine there's been probably a 2 or 3 game span since this guy was on campus that his name wasn't mentioned. So we're talking about Cole Pennington. Yeah, Cole Pennington, rather famous name in Herd football circles, son of all-timer, second all-time leading passer Chad Pennington. Cole, 6'2", 196 pound from Lexington, Kentucky, plays football for his dad. Chaz, the head coach at Sayre. And Cole, pretty talented kid. It's not like it was Marshall or nobody. He had a handful of offers all around the MAC and whatnot. So he could have went anywhere, and he chose to continue the Pennington legacy here at Marshall. We'll see if ultimately he comes and stays and graduates. We'll see. But pretty cool nonetheless to see a new generation of Pennington taking pictures in the old number 10 jersey. And lastly, Peter Zamora, who's probably been the most outspoken quarterback of the kids recruited in the 2022 class, the 6', 200-pounder from Anderson, South Carolina. Every time I log onto Twitter and check my timeline, it seems like Peter Zamora is trying to recruit another kid to come to Marshall, or he's pumped about coming here himself, or anything. You can tell he's all in on the herd, and a little bit under recruited by a lot of folks, and another one that a lot of people think Marshall has stolen. And he is all in on the herd. Let me say that again. He is all in on the herd. He loves the herd. I guess the whole element is right up his alley. So, Trace, what about these young 3 kids? What about the process recruiting now? Different than what we've seen at Marshall, at least for the last decade under Doc Holliday. Doc was pretty cut and dry. It was 1 kid a year, maybe 2 kids a year. If something happened, there was a transfer out or whatever. But he tried to keep it 3 guys, 4 guys on the roster, and that was it. So how are we seeing it all change now? What do you think about all this?
Well, I think it's definitely a good thing to have as much within reason, as much quarterback depth as possible. I mean, when you only recruit one guy, or so a year, you just don't have that many options. And I mean, maybe if there would have been more guys behind, the Isaiah Greens and the Chase Littons of the world, maybe they would have felt that they had to try a little harder to try, to improve, instead of just they knew that they had nothing to worry about. Like, maybe if there would have been more competition behind there, that would have ended up a little better for those guys, because both of those guys, talented guys, but just didn't work out ultimately long term. So, I mean, that's always a good thing, I think, is to have a lot of depth back there. And I mean, good Lord, you got a friggin' Pennington number 10 quarterback again. Like, what? Even if he doesn't play a snap, that's a big coup right there for Marshall. I mean, all the fans, big coup. All the fans are going to eat it up. I mean, they already are. And he did have quite a few offers of mid-major schools. So, put it this way, he had a lot more offers than his dad did coming out of high school. So
true.
So that could work out well. I mean, how cool would that be if he ends up being like a stud quarterback from Marshall? It'd be awesome. So I like that they have more guys to turn to at quarterback, hopefully moving forward.
Yeah. I'm just, these new transfer rules, you have to be able to have somebody to step in and help you, because as bad as we don't want these things to happen, and they are a double-edged sword. Yeah, you can get a transfer from somewhere else, but at the end of the season, or at really any time, your quarterback can be like, you know what? I'm done playing this season because I don't want to play here next year, and I don't want to get hurt. And I've had a year and a half or 2 seasons. I've proven I can play, and I'm going to transfer somewhere else. And they can't stop you. Everybody gets to transfer once without sitting. So the dynamic in college football with transfers is brought a whole new way to recruiting. And for better or worse, it's here to stay. It's not going away. So if you got a guy who lights it up for 2 or 3 years and he just isn't that in love with your school, or somebody bigger comes calling, he can go. He can bounce. And we saw that with an offensive lineman for Marshall this year, Kane Madden. Everybody was big on him. He was an All-American last year, and the cream of the crop started calling, and the lure became too great. And now he's at Notre Dame, so those things can happen. So just imagine that happening with your, well, let's say if Grant Wells becomes an All-American quarterback, you think the big schools aren't going to come calling? Of course they are. They're going to start immediately. Mm-hmm. And that lure, that draw can be strong. So you have to change the way you recruit this position. If it's the single most important position on the field, Trace, you have to have guys that can play. And when somebody leaves, you have to have another guy that can step in there and play. And the other thing that I think plays into that, and I believe you will agree with me wholeheartedly, is now it becomes even more important for you to find a quality quarterback coach and a quality offensive coordinator so that you can develop all these guys. So if those scenarios happen, you've got somebody you can trust to go in there and play. But good for Marshall for having two guys that can step in there and get the job done in Luke Zaban and Grant Wells. Trace, who are you most excited to see of the two guys on the roster? Who are you most excited to see this year?
Maybe I could just flip a coin and whichever it lands on, that'll just be my choice. Maybe that'll be the way to go through these answers. Oh, no. I mean, Grant Wells. I'm most excited to see him in year 2, as you should be. I mean, it's a reoccurring theme. We keep waiting for one of these guys, one of these quarterbacks that Marshall's had since Cato to make that year 1 to year 2 jump. We always talk about that Cato did. That's a big allure, to watch for Grant Wells this year. That it's something that's going to captivate the fan base one way or the other, because if he doesn't improve, the fan base is going to, some of the fans are going to be calling for his head. And if he does improve, then the fans are going to totally turn on his side. And it's going to be, it's going to be a good thing. So I'd like to see that. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to throw 40 touchdowns and 4,000 yards. I'm not going to predict that, but I'd like to see a pretty significant jump from year 1 to year 2. And so that's why, just in that regard alone, I'm most excited to see him and to see if he plays more consistently.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I hope honestly that Marshall's not in a scenario where he has to pass that many times to even get to 40 touchdowns. I mean, I know it was different with Cato because Devin Johnson was also running a bunch of yards and he was scoring a bunch on the ground, and the herd as a whole was just scoring a bunch of points. So it didn't, they weren't forced into passing scenarios. It just worked, and they scored a lot of points. But yeah, I'm most excited to see Grant Wells as well. I want to see the continued development. I want to see if he's able to get over the hump of late season, play a full slate of games. If Marshall's able to get a full slate of games in, I want to see if it's a one game at a time approach, and if they're able to close out strong and ultimately bring a Conference USA title back to Huntington in Charles Huff's first year. Well, this next question is kind of null and void. Who's the hardest to replace? Well, you're not replacing anybody. So who's the toughest to replace, Trace? Well,
Rakeem Cato.
Who? That is true. They are still waiting to replace Rakeem Cato. Now, Marshall has had some prolific passers since then, but nobody's come close to what he's been able to tally. And well, really, I mean, honestly, nobody's tallied that before or after him. So it's an unfair answer, Trace, but one that's accurate nonetheless. Who's your breakout player this year? I mean, Grant Wells broke out last year out of nowhere. If you remember last year, we were talking about this and we were wondering what we would have in Grant Wells, and boy, did he ever break out. I mean, the situation of, week 1 against Eastern Kentucky on ESPN, first game as a starter, and he just lit it up. Couldn't have played any better. And you come out the very next week and you play a top 25 Appalachian State team at home and you win that game in a game he did not play well at all. I mean, he played okay. He just didn't light it up. He had like 150 yards, and I don't even know if he threw a touchdown pass. But he had the rushing touchdown. Yeah. And the Herd was able to still win. So then you're thinking, wow, they just beat a top 25 team, and our quarterback didn't even have a passing touchdown. All right, maybe we got something here. So is it a case of a bigger breakout season in your mind?
Probably, because it's hard to expect Luke Zaban to get significant, a lot of reps unless Grant Wells is hurt or something crazy. Right. It's hard to expect that. So I think this is a case of, just seeing him have even a bigger breakout year. I mean, 18 touchdowns, 9 picks. So maybe somewhere in the 22 to 23 touchdown range, maybe pushing 25 or more, I think that would be a nice, modest, but very important and good breakout type of thing, just to continue to progress from year 1 to year 2. That would be a big step in my opinion. So
I'm not sure 22 or 23 is enough when you had 18 through 10 games and you're talking about playing 12, 13, and hopefully 14, maybe
30 then.
You better have somewhere close to 30 to 35 if you're having a bigger. You better double that touchdown tally if you're going to play all of them and hope to win most of them. But yeah, I get what you're going with. So who's the MVP of the unit? Wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah, wash, rinse, repeat. Got to be him.
It's got to be. If Marshall's going to have any hope of having a positive year one under Charles Huff, it's got to be Grant Wells. But it's hard to, outdo a first-team all-conference year. You have to repeat that facet, but put up better numbers. So what's your hot take for the quarterback unit here in 2021, Trace?
Oh, gosh. Hot take. My hot take is this. I mean, I guess this would pretty much be a hot take just based on Phil Steele's preseason predictions. But Grant Wells, in my opinion, is going to have another first-team all-conference USA year at quarterback. That's my hot take, because that doesn't happen at Marshall very often. That has not happened in a long time, back-to-back first-team years. I mean, other than Rakeem Cato, it had been a decade or more since a Marshall quarterback had done that. So that doesn't happen very often. That does not come around very long.
Right.
And everybody's thinking, everybody in the back of their mind right now, for right or for wrong, is thinking of those last 3 games, thinking of how he fell off, at the end of the year there. And now some people are kind of writing him off. And I think that now, you got to just ignore that for now, because it's a new year. It's a new situation. It's not as unorthodox of a year now as it was last year. He's played a year. He's got more experience. So I expect him to have a better year than he had last year, and that would probably lend himself to falling on first team again. That's my opinion, because I think he's got the best chance because he's the best returning quarterback in the conference. So,
well, I've got a little bit of a singular hot take, and then as the unit, I like Grant Wells to go for 3,000 yards passing this year, upwards of 35 touchdown passes. But as a unit, I like Luke Zaban to get maybe another 1,000 yards sprinkled in there somehow. So I like the whole unit to go for 4,000 yards passing and about 40 touchdowns as a unit.
That'd get it done.
Yeah, that's my take, my hot take. So hang with us on the other side of this break. We're going to talk about, these are all aware of by now. Lots of first-time coaches coming to the herd. Lots of second tenure let me try that again. Lots of first-timers to the herd, a second tenured coach, and one making his third appearance for the herd. Hang with us. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast.
Gains in motion. Wells drops on second and goal. Wide open touchdown. A bust allows Willie Johnson to get Marshall on top again.
We're time to talk coaches now for the herd. First-year coach Charles Huff. Everybody knows that now, but it's a whole brand new staff as well in Huntington. There were a lot of guys that we thought might get a shot to hold over for Huff's first staff. And when the dust settled and it was all said and done, there was only one guy that remained from the previous administration, and that was, of course, offensive coordinator Tim Cramsey. We'll talk about that in a minute, but you got to start at the top, Trace, and that is, of course, again, head coach Charles Huff in his first season as Marshall, first head coaching gig at the FBS level. Previously, before coming to Marshall, was the running backs coach at Alabama. So, around some of the finest coaches in the college world at Alabama, and had several stops before that, Penn State, Mississippi State, yada, yada, yada. So he's been around a lot of SEC, a lot of Big Ten ball, just ready for this. He's primed for this. It was a Broyles Award winner that goes out to the nation's top assistant coach. I mean, the pedigree is there. The resume is there. It was just time. And hopefully the relationship with what Marshall needed versus what Charles Huff is bringing is one that will provide many, many moments of excitement and many, many dubs in the win column for the herd. Thoughts on Charles Huff, Trace?
Yeah, I mean, he's, in my opinion, without actually having coached the game so far in the first several months, he's been pretty flawless. I mean, he's hit home run after home run so far. I mean, if you want to just look in recruiting for 2022 class alone, good Lord, that's a home run right there. I mean, that 2022 recruiting class it's about to be, numbers wise, the best in school history. It's going to be that. I mean, unless something drastic changes and people, players bow out or whatever, that class is legendary, going to be legendary. I mean, it's crazy how much talent he's bringing in. And I mean, he's hit a home run with the fans, reaching out in the community, doing a lot of that kind of stuff that quite frankly and quite honestly, Doc did not excel at. Like as far as, the people skills stuff. And he's just the breath of fresh air that Marshall University athletics needs, let alone just a football program. He is that. And, everybody said it, and I've said it numerous times. They needed to break out of the trend that they've been in with hiring head coaches for football. They needed to go in a completely different direction, and I'm glad they did. And I think they're going to really reap the benefits. I mean, even in year one, Marshall's still a Conference USA title threat, big threat. So I expect good things right off the bat from him. And so far, there's no signs that point to the contrary or, whatever. So I'm excited.
Let's talk about what he's done. Like you said, before even coaching a game, that doesn't happen for another month-ish. You mentioned the 2021 or the 2022 class currently ranked, Rivals ranks Marshall's class currently at number 35 in the country. 21 commitments so far in the 2022 class. Amazing stuff that's going on. If you want to, I feel comfortable saying that right now Charles Huff has made all the right moves in the community, on the field, in the recruiting aspect, hiring coaches. He brought guys back that fans from different eras of Marshall football can relate to, guys that used to play there. I mean, he's making all the right moves. You can tell he knows what he's doing, and you can also tell that this is a completely different approach from what we've seen in the past, whereas you just hire guys that you may know or, I know Doc was really good at finding assistant coaches, young up-and-comers that were great recruiters that could also work at a position and were effective at that, but this is just something a little bit different. I feel a different vibe going on in Huntington, and I kind of like it. I'll be honest with you. And I think the fan base kind of likes it. We're talking about some things that are being instituted in game days that weren't going on. They want to make the game day more of an experience instead of just relying on a passionate fan base to show up and watch the herd play. They're always going to do that, but you want to keep them coming back, then make it an experience that's more enjoyable. So, and I know he's had a word on all that kind of stuff, and he's bringing some things that he's learned from schools around the country that pack the house every week. So why wouldn't you want that kind of information? Moving on, Trace, the lone holdover from Doc Holliday's last staff, offensive coordinator / quarterbacks coach, Tim Cramsey, entering his now 4th season with the herd. I don't want to say it's do or die, but something's got to happen here. There's got to be some points in bunches. There got to be some yards in bunches. Huff wouldn't have kept him if he didn't think that he was the guy for the job right now. He just wouldn't. He didn't keep anybody else, So he obviously has faith in Cramsey to do some things here and get the herd going. And we talked about it a lot. Was Cramsey reeled in last year and just not allowed to run what he wanted to run, or was it just not working? I guess we'll get to see a little bit more of that this year. Do the reins come off? Does he get complete control? Does he get to do what he wants to do? We shall see. There's no need to talk about where Cramsey was before that because he's been at Marshall for 4 years. Thoughts on retaining Tim Cramsey, Trace?
Yeah, it surprised me. I mean, I won't lie, it surprised me. But I mean, him and Huff have a previous connection, or I don't even remember where they coached together or something along those lines. But I know they have a connection before. And, Huff felt it was important to have some continuity still back with the offense and everything. And, I see it that way. But, I'm at the point where I think it is do or die time for Cramsey. I mean, it's been, like I said, it's been a while. It's been a hot minute. I mean, he's had chances, and like the offense have just, I think the best that they've ever been while he's been at Marshall is like 67th in total offense or something. That's just you're not going to win a championship that way. I mean, you have to have one of those really, really good offenses, and history has shown that for Marshall. I mean, it just has to be that way. And like you said, and everybody has said, Is it just because Doc wouldn't let him, do what he wanted to do? Is it because of Doc's philosophy? Who knows? We'll see. But I find it very hard to believe that Huff would come in and not have any input on the offense whatsoever. Put it that way. I find that hard to believe. So even if Cramsey's the OC still, it's going to look different. And Huff's going to have some ideas that he wants executed because he's the man. So he is the one in charge. So hopefully this is the year, we get to see the quote unquote real Tim Cramsey, if the real Tim Cramsey is out there to exist.
Would the real Tim Cramsey please stand up?
Please stand up.
Defensive coordinator / safeties coach Lance Guidry, first year with Marshall. Of course, everybody now is going to be first year with the Herd, but like I said, some of these guys are on their second or third tenure with Marshall. It was their first year all over again. First year with Marshall. Previous stop for Guidry was safeties coach at FAU in 2020, but he was a former head coach at McNeese State for like 3 years or 6 years or something like that. So he's got head coaching experience. It's just his most recent stop was on staff at FAU last year. Thoughts on Lance Guidry?
I like him. I mean, anytime you can have a guy that's been a head coach, anytime you can have him on your staff as a coordinator, that has to be a good thing in my opinion. And he did obviously good things at FAU, and I've heard all the things I've heard about him have been positive. So I think the defense from Marshall over the last several years has been really good for the most part, and in last year it was absolutely spectacular most of the year. And they return a lot of those guys. So the defense is going to be a major focal point this year again. And then everybody expects big things from the defense again. And I think that, under his tutelage, so to speak, that it'll be much of the same as it was last year because they got a lot of ballers out there on defense.
Yeah, there are a lot of ballers that are departed. So we'll have to see how those gaps get filled. Tavante Beckett's just don't grow on trees usually. So that's a huge gap to fill. Darius Hodge leaving is a huge gap to fill. There are plenty of guys that are capable of filling those holes, but of course it's going to have to come together. So we'll see how that goes. Here's the one that I think that you might be the most mixed over. I'm not sure here, but let's see. Assistant head coach, tight end coach, Bill Legg, back in Huntington, first year again on the staff. But yeah, he's the guy that's now in his third separate tenure with the Herd. Coaching tight ends this year. From 2010 to 2017, Trace, he was the Herd offensive coordinator, as we all know. Was responsible for a lot of yards and a lot of points. 2001, 2002 was tight end coach for the Herd and also recruiting coordinator, but just most recently, he was assistant to the head coach at WVU. It sounds like The Office. He wasn't assistant head coach. He was assistant to the head coach. Thoughts on Bill Legg being back in Huntington, man?
You know what? I don't have a problem with it now at all. I really don't because, as a tight ends coach, it's a very low risk decision. And it's not like they're bringing him in to be the offensive coordinator. If that wasn't the case, then people were like, "Oh no, not this again." But no, for the roles that he has right now, I got no problem with it. And he's been tight ends coach at Marshall, you said, in the Pruitt regime. So I don't think, and it's good to have a guy that's familiar with the program like he is. It's been here. This is, like you said, third different time here and everything. So it's a low risk hire. It's a very low risk situation. So I'm all for it. Honestly, I'll be perfectly honest. I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, and we would be foolish to think that Cramsey and Legg and Lockett and Clint Trickett and all these guys aren't in a room together drawing up plays or talking off.
Yeah.
All they do is the unit as a whole has to jive. So they're all going to spend time with one another. It's just it all falls on Tim Cramsey to get make it all work. So I kind of like that Bill Legg is back in town, and he brings a lot of knowledge. He was a lot of the guys on previous rosters loved him as a coach.
Yeah,
loved him as a coach. So, you don't stay coaching ball for 40 years or however long he's been coaching ball by accident. You have to be good at it. And he's pretty good at it. So let's see how it works out. Cornerbacks coach, Dominique Brown, first-year coach for the Herd. Last year, co-DC and DBs coach at UT Martin. What do you got for me about Dominique Brown?
Not much. He follow on Twitter. We follow each other on there, so that's pretty cool. He very, from the things I've seen and like the presser that they had where all the coaches are introduced and stuff, seems like a really energetic guy. So I mean, I really don't know a whole lot about him personally as far as his career and coaching and stuff, but I think my initial vibes, thoughts of him are pretty positive. I mean, I think he's gonna this staff's gonna be really predicated around energy, I think, and that's something I think that they've kind of been, the program has been lacking. So as long as he can bring energy with with some of the guys he's got coming back to work with, I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, you're talking about 11 coaches in various roles that all exude energy, all of them. Right. And in years past, it seems like there was a handful. It wasn't necessarily all of them. And of course, Doc Holliday wasn't the social media guy. He, when he sent tweets out, it was always very professional sounding, like it was a business email instead of like
gifts
it just didn't have any energy to it. It was like,
no,
it was like a thank you or or something like that. It was very business oriented, but it is what do you expect from, somebody that probably didn't give two whips about social media? Doc Holliday that was not his thing, and it was quite apparent. But these guys, most, if not all, well, not all of them, but most of them, I follow all of them on Twitter, but most of them are quite active. And, you can tell that they were kind of built for this. This is in their wheelhouse.
It's appealing for, student athletes.
Of course. Running backs coach Telly Lockett, first-year coach with the Herd. Last year was senior offensive quality control analysis for Miami Hurricanes. And before that, spent 2 years as the tight ends coach at Florida State. So you get that solid Florida tie that is so important to Marshall. And you get it from a guy who's been at two of the three largest, most prominent universities in the state of Florida. Telly Lockett's a name that I've actually heard before, like long before, he was at Marshall. So running backs is kind of where you start to hide in those guys that can work their group and recruit the hell out of guys. And Marshall's been doing that for a number of years. So I think Telly Lockett's going to be just the next great running backs coach recruiter that Marshall has. And also able to develop his positional group. So if you don't mind, if you don't have like a myriad of thoughts for a lot of these guys, you can interrupt me when we're talking about one, but I'm not going to put you on the spot for everybody. Linebackers coach Shannon Morrison, first year with Marshall. This year had a previous tenure before, served as linebackers and safeties coach, 05-06 linebackers, 07-08 safeties with Marshall. Former Marshall player. You love having that. Yeah. And most recently was DB's coach at Eastern Kentucky in 2020. So he was on the sidelines for Grant Wells' first career start. Looking across and watching all that happen. And then in 2018 and 19 was linebackers coach at EKU. We're going to pause right there because it's always great to have former players on the staff because they bring back a certain section of the fan base that remember those guys in uniform. Right. And they also may remember them 05 through 08 when he was a coach before. So you get to re-recruit some of your fan base when you bring guys that were productive players that are also, oh, by the way, pretty good coaches. There's a number of guys that we can talk about that are former players that are now on this coaching staff. Trace, what do you think about bringing Shannon Morrison back again?
Oh, I love it. I love the fact that Charles Huff has made a very conscious effort into bringing back Marshall alumni, bringing back these guys that, quite frankly, a lot of them felt they were unwelcomed in recent years. And that's been out there in the media. I know we've all seen that.
It's no secret.
It's no secret. we're not breaking any ground here. That stuff has been publicized. So I'm really glad. That's another thing I was going to say that Huff's hit another home run with is bringing back former players. I mean, Ralph Street, Shannon Morrison, all these guys. I mean, you want to have these guys back involved in the program, and it's great to see. It really is, and that's what it's about. It's the even when you're going out of the program, even though you graduated 25 years ago or whatever, it never leaves you. You know what I mean? It's not supposed to just leave you, and it's good to bring guys back because they have a lot to give to their alma mater. So,
yeah, and something that goes along with that is these guys that have been brought back, they have buddies still that they will now hopefully re-recruit and bring back around. And then you just kind of have this domino effect of former players that start to feel comfortable being back around again, and it can only be good. It can only be good for the program. Let's move along to offensive line coach Eddie Morrissey. First year with the Herd, offensive line coach at Austin P in 2019, but coached high school ranks in 2020 at a high school in Eugene, Oregon. Big area of emphasis for the Herd for a long time. Yeah. Decades worth of great offensive line play, and really good offensive line coaches. Really good. The last two offensive line coaches Marshall had now at Power 5 schools. And one of those is at Oregon. So it doesn't get much more high profile than that. So a lot of pressure here on Eddie Morrissey to continue what has been built over a long time. As I said, stellar offensive line play for the last decade, but really you can go back 20 years and start ripping off offensive linemen that were productive NFL players that are all-timers just in the Herd ranks. I mean, It's been a real area of emphasis, and luckily, Marshall has been really good at recruiting offensive linemen. A lot of them come from the state of Kentucky, so I hope they continue to hit those areas that have been successful for them in the past, but breaking new ground in new areas. We're seeing some kids that coming from over from like JUCO ranks and all the way out in California, and so you can tell there's no stone being left unturned. Moving on to a guy that you just said, defensive line coach Ralph Street. First year with the Herd, former Marshall player. I remember this guy when he was a player. And this is Mac era Marshall, right? Like ESPN darling Marshall, dominating peak Herd football, late 90s. This was Ralph Street's time on the field. And for him to come back and coach is awesome because he was a very popular player way back when.
Yeah.
And we keep saying this. It would be one thing if they were just players and you bring them back to coach just for, just to like capture a little bit of the fan base. But they're good coaches. Ralph Street was defensive coordinator at Florida A&M University and was in charge of one of the most stout defenses in their conference. So he's great at what he does as well. And I know you mentioned him before. I know you got thoughts on Ralph Street, so give them to me.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the fact that he played for the Herd in the past, that right there is a check mark in his favor right there. And like you said, the coaching experience, the recent history of success that he's had as a coach, that speaks for itself as well. I mean, he really impressed me in that opening presser that they had. Another guy, just energy. I mean, social media. Look at his social media. They just exude the energy and passion. Like they're here. These guys are here to make a name for themselves, a name for Marshall. I mean, it's special. It's especially special for him because he's coming back to his school. I mean, it's good to see that. And I expect it to lead to even better things in the future, to be honest. So I'm excited for especially having Ralph Street back there on the staff.
Yeah. Wide receivers coach Clint Trickett. And I know folks always put that frown on when they have a WVU tie, but Clint Trickett's a pretty productive coach.
Sure.
Of course, played quarterback initially at Florida State, ended up at West Virginia University. I think he's a born West Virginian because his dad, what's his dad's name? Rick Trickett was the offensive line coach at West Virginia forever. So I'm pretty sure those Trickett boys were born here I'm in Florida, there in the Mountain State. But look, Clint is first-year coach at Marshall, but he's been around. Young guy. He wasn't that long ago he was playing college ball. But last year, he was the co-offensive coordinator at Florida Atlantic at FAU and quarterbacks coach. He coached tight ends at FAU. I remember seeing him for the first time after his college playing days in the first season of Last Chance U, because he was a coach down there at the community college featured in Last Chance U. So Clint Trickett's a young dude, and he's a high-energy guy, and he's got some swag, and you can tell that, like, he's an up-and-comer. I mean, he's a guy who's poised to be a big-time position coach, big-time a coordinator, and maybe somewhere down the line, if it all goes right, he's going to be a head coach somewhere. And, I think it's Travis Trickett is his brother's name. They're doing great things down in Georgia. Is it Georgia State they're at? I think it's Georgia State.
Think so.
Yeah. So anyway, you can tell at some point these Trickett boys are going to link back up on a coaching staff together, and it's probably going to be something pretty fun to watch. But for now, Marshall gets his experience as a former coordinator, but coaching wide receivers. So you got to love that. Last guy we're going to talk about as far as positions type goes is the special teams coach, Jeremy Springer, first year for the Herd. Comes over after 3 years as a special teams coordinator at Arizona under Rich Rod, I guess, since that was about the time Rich Rod was there, right? 3 years-ish? Has it been that long ago? I don't know. Pretty close.
I think Rich Rod's was longer than that.
Was it? Is it more than 3 years that he was there? I mean, he's been gone more than 3 years? Really? Okay.
I think so. I can't swear to it, but
okay. I mean, that's the last time I knew who the head coach at Arizona was.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know who it is now.
They have sucked recently.
And of course, one of the more important coaches on the staff that we have clamored over annually used to be called the strength and conditioning coach. Marshall's title for this guy now is director of sports performance, and it's first year with the Herd, Ben Ashford. And I know you talked about energy in the press conference. This dude's doing jumping jacks at his introductory press conference, and he's been on social media a couple of times, made the Pat McAfee podcast, for what he was doing. I mean, you got to love it. He comes over from 6 years as head strength and conditioning coach at Samford. So I think sneakily Marshall has hired themselves a phenomenal strength and conditioning coach. I think he's got the potential to be the best one that Marshall's had since who we always talk about, Scott Sinclair, who's been at UGA. They've had good ones. I mean, Luke Day, we heard a few weeks ago when we had did our conversation with Jaquan Euler, he credited Luke Day for a lot of what the team was doing, a lot of their motivation and how they were poised and ready to have a good season. Yep. And of course, now Luke Day's over at South Carolina. So Ben Ashford has got the potential in my mind right off the rip to be the best one we've had at Marshall or seen at Marshall since Scott Sinclair. A couple of guys we have to mention. There's a lot there, just like with Western Kentucky, there's a myriad of guys in quality control roles and analyst roles and this, that, and the other. But these two guys you got to talk about. And that is senior analyst and director of player development, number 22, Doug Chapman, all-timer for the Herd. You got to bring him back. You got to talk about him for a second. And senior analyst and special assistant to the head coach, all-timer, former Herd player from yesteryear, Mike Bartram.
Yep.
Trace, we can't talk about coaches and not talk about these two guys. What do you think about the moves bringing Doug Chapman back to town and bringing Mike Bartram from the Eagles organization back to town?
Just superstar hires. I mean, just superstar hires. And it just goes back to that theme. We've been beating that drum this whole episode. Bringing back the former players, bringing back, Marshall's history, bringing back these guys that you want involved in the program. And, I mean, outside of Chad Pennington or, somebody like that, or Byron Lutwich or somebody like that, is there really many guys that have played at Marshall that are going to be better suited for a coach than, for the staff than Bartram and Chapman? I mean, that really surprised me when I saw that on social media. They were getting those two guys, especially Bartram coming from the Eagles. I mean, when I saw that, I'm like, okay, this is a really big commitment that they're trying, that they're, that you can just see that they're committed to making Marshall, a alumni. They're trying to bring these guys back, and they're committed to making it more of a family atmosphere. And, it's going to pay off because, they just know the program so well, and they're just going to be just amazing ambassadors, guys, recruiting. I'm sure if they'll get it, they're just guys that you simply want to have in the program, especially Bartram with NFL experience. So just superstar hires right there.
Yeah, Doug Chapman played in the NFL as well. He played a few good years with the Vikings and all that kind of stuff. But these are guys that are focal point players for certain eras of Herd fans. Now, Mike Bartram played before my time, but I still know him as a all-time Herd great. Doug Chapman, I know as a Herd great. I've seen the highlight tapes. I've seen the plays. And, there's not a Herd fan that in the YouTube era that hasn't watched, old Marshall highlights and seen runs of Doug Chapman.
Yep.
You're in all of it, So it's great having these guys back. The last thing we've got to talk about. Well, first thing, give me 2 tidbits on this before we close out the coaches. That's 4 former players, 4 former Herd players on this current staff, and that's 6 former or current either offensive coordinators or defensive coordinators on this staff. I think it was a very calculated coaching staff to put together. Charles Huff knew what he wanted to do, and he went out and found guys that fit the bill. And then if they were also Herd alums, wow, it just was icing on the cake. So the last big thing we have to talk about, this isn't a coach, but Mike Hamrick's not the AD anymore. You have interim athletic director Jeff O'Malley. And, everybody's going to have thoughts about it, but you have to talk about that because there at some point, there's going to be a full-time athletic director named. I don't know where they are with the search. I don't know how aggressive they're being with the search. I don't know, there's just not much out there floating about it. But you're 6 weeks away, 5 weeks away from playing a football game. Can you really afford to go into your football season without a full-time athletic director? I know Jeff O'Malley is a full-time working athletic director, but he's still interim. Yeah. So you're either going to think like, okay, they're going to make Jeff O'Malley the actual athletic director, remove the interim tag, or they're going to have somebody lined up. And it's all got to happen in the span of about a month. Some decisions are going to have to be made like pretty daggone quick. What do you think, Trace? If you're the board of governors and you're charged with making this hire, like, what do you do? Where are you looking? Are you bringing Dan D'Antoni in? Are you bringing in Charles Huff now? And of course, if you're bringing in the crown jewel, your top earners, your top coaches, your biggest, it's got to be Grassy, D'Antoni, and Huff. Yeah. Like, what do you do? You got a month. We're not hearing speculation of names out there. I'm not seeing short lists. We're not seeing potential candidates. Nothing. It's like very hush hush. And I know Marshall's been pretty hush hush about things in the past, but when you're talking about something like an AD, you would expect some of that to leak out. Yeah. So is that of concern to you?
No, not really. Mainly because, as Herd fans, everybody should trust Jeff O'Malley at this point. I think if they hired him right now as the permanent AD, I don't think they'd miss a beat. And quite frankly, I think he can end up being even better than what Mike Hamrick was. And So maybe that's why they're not in such a sense of urgency to hire a new guy. Maybe they're just content with having an interim tag for a while. I don't know. But one thing for sure is if that's not what they're planning to do, if they're still planning to hire a new AD, they can't rush it. That's one thing that they certainly can't do. But at the same time, after a while, you have to have a guy in place. It's a tricky situation because it's been a long time since they had to worry about this. It's been a long time. So it's kind of uncharted water a little bit there, just because this administration, all the people involved right now, had nothing to do with hiring Mike Hamrick before then. So, it's tricky, but I think they're in a pretty good spot right now, but they can't. I mean, obviously, you can't keep an interim tag on somebody forever. I mean,
Yeah. And I don't know if there's any rush because, it's not like you've got a bunch of out of conference games that you've got to get scheduled in football for next season. And, the basketball staff, Danny can probably fill out his basketball schedule. If it's not completely filled out now, he can pick up a handful of games if they need to. I have faith that they can do that. They locked in Grassy for a long-term extension already, so that's not something that's hanging over the head of the athletic director or one coming in. But at the end of the day, we've seen that this new board of governors is willing to buck tradition. They did it with the hiring of the football coach. They didn't work the good old boy network, as you like to say. They went out and hired a guy that was out of the norm for what we had seen at Marshall for a long time. So is that the direction that they go with the athletic director too? We shall see. But, you got to give credit to Mike Hamrick for however it ended. He did great things in terms of hiring championship coaches. He hired Chris Grassy. He won a national title. You can't take that away. He hired Doc Holliday, and for whatever reason your feelings are on Doc, he brought a conference championship back to Huntington. Would you have liked to seen more? Absolutely, you would have. But he brought a conference championship back to Huntington. He elevated the program from where it was under the head coach Mark Snyder. Made Marshall fun again. And Dan D'Antoni hired Dan D'Antoni and took him to the NCAA tournament and got him a win. That's just these are highlight things that haven't happened in lifetime. So you think I remember you saying this hadn't happened in my lifetime. Never seen that. And you got to experience an NCAA tournament victory. So he built wonderful facilities, some of the finest in the country. The soccer field is amazing. The soccer complex actually is amazing. The indoor facility is amazing. The Hall of Fame is awesome. They even managed to spruce up the Joan to a certain extent and made it a more lively place. At least if you're watching on TV, it's more lively. So it remains to see what direction they go or which tree they try to pick a piece of fruit from for the next AD, or if they just hire within. But anyway, it's something to keep an eye on. Trace, we got to get out of here. We're running already over an hour, but who really gives a crap? It's our show and we love it. But before we get out of here, give me some final thoughts about this quarterback unit and anything else you want to talk about.
Oh, it's good to be this close to football season. It really is. I mean, who doesn't want that? I mean, when Marshall football is playing, everything's better. Everything's better. Even if they start losing games, it's just the fact that Marshall football is back, and it just gives you a certain peace of mind. And being able to talk about it preseason, that's exciting too. Coming on here, we love it. We love this stuff. We eat it up, and getting to talk about starting out at the gates for position groups for Marshall with quarterbacks and coaches, I think it's important. Because, I mean, you want to start strong, and it's more fitting now than probably any other year before, because now Marshall got a new head football coach. So, and a lot of totally different coaching staff. So I think we needed to address that early, get people involved early, listeners, and of course the whole quarterback situation, who isn't involved or interested in a quarterback situation from year to year. I mean, that's the most it's the most high profile position in the sport. So, I like the fact we started there, and I'm looking forward to getting into more position groups and getting closer and closer to that game one.
Yeah, for me, it's always great when we start talking preseason stuff because my juices start to get flowing, and it just means it's getting close. And for better or worse, it's coming, and I think it's a little bit for better this year for Marshall. So. We absolutely will continue this series. And just like I told you guys, if you listened to our episode of Western Kentucky and got the lowdown on WKU quarterback unit, it's dealer's choice with these guys. So it's up to Trace. And I can't tell you we'll be back next week with wide receivers because I don't know what he's going to want to talk about next week. It's just up to him completely. And we'll just keep you guys on, in limbo until we figure it out. But, yeah, we always going to play it by ear. Don't don't stop listening though, because we're going to cover everybody just like we did the quarterbacks. There's some real studs that are coming back at various positions. There's legitimate questions that need answered at certain positions, or at least the depth of certain positions. And we're going to get into all that. And we're going to get you guys ready for week 1 at Navy. It's going to be a special game, first game in the Huff era. They're going to be doing some, they're going to be honoring Jack Lingle, I just saw the other day.
Yeah.
So it's going to be pretty special. And then, we're going to be full swing, full tilt as we power through the 2021 season and see if Marshall can, quote, close the gap, as what Charles Huff is the mantra for the herd this year. So anyway, let's get out of here until next week. Trace, you can take us out.
Go Herds.
Go Tops. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Later.